When your own child looks you in the eyes and tells you that you no longer belong, it's more than heartbreak. It's annihilation. But what if I told you I'd been preparing for that moment long before it ever came? This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about reclaiming power in silence and rising when no one believes you will. Stick with me until the end. And if you've ever been pushed aside by those you love most, drop a comment. I see you. Let's get into it. I used to wake up before the sun rose just to soak in the silence. Before the coffee brewed, before anyone stirred in their rooms, I would sit by the kitchen window and listen to the stillness of my house. The floor would creak gently beneath my feet, and the radiator would hum softly, reminders of a home that, for so long, had felt like mine, a place I built, nurtured, and protected. Those mornings were mine, my sanctuary. I didn't need loud gestures of love or elaborate conversations to feel fulfilled. Watching my children sleep in their beds, breathing steadily, knowing they were safe and cared for, that was enough. At least, it used to be. My son, Aaron, was always the quiet one, thoughtful. A deep soul, even as a child, he'd sketch for hours and bring me his little drawings, dragons, warriors, space worlds he built in his mind. We had a connection that words couldn't define. When he was younger, he'd sit next to me on the porch swing, resting his head on my shoulder as we watched the wind sway the trees. He didn't say much, but I always felt his love in those silent moments. My husband, Mark, was practical, a man of systems, of routines. He wasn't emotionally expressive, but I understood his love language, acts of service, fixing the leaky faucet without being asked, gassing up my car before I noticed it was empty. For years, I interpreted those gestures as devotion. For years, I chose to believe we were in sync, even if we didn't speak the same emotional dialect. And yet, looking back now, I see the cracks I refused to acknowledge. There were missed glances at dinner, conversations that ended too quickly. That one Christmas when he handed me a gift card, after I spent weeks finding him the vintage watch he mentioned in passing. I told myself not to read into it. We were just tired. Life was heavy. The kids were growing. Stress was normal. I learned how to swallow doubt in silence, how to love without expectation, how to convince myself that loyalty alone would carry a marriage, that presence alone would sustain a family. We had routines that looked like closeness, Sunday pancakes, movie nights, holiday traditions, and maybe that's why the day Aaron screamed those words at me, "You don't live here anymore," felt so jarring, because until that moment, I had convinced myself that the foundation was still intact, that love was still enough, that I still mattered in this home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This part of the story, this part is about before everything broke. It's about the evenings we still ate together, the nights I still tucked away extra blankets in their rooms because I knew the temperature would dip. It's about the time I found Aaron's sketchbook under the couch and carefully returned it to his shelf, admiring the shading on a drawing of a phoenix rising from flames. It's about the last time Mark made me tea when I had a cold. He didn't say much, just handed me the mug and walked away. But I held on to that small kindness like it meant everything. Because when you start to feel invisible, even the tiniest gesture feels like an anchor. I remember the smell of cinnamon from the diffuser in the living room, the sound of the washing machine thumping unevenly in the laundry room, the way the dog would thump her tail against the floor when I walked in, as if she knew I was still needed by someone. I needed to believe that I still belonged here, that this was still my place, that my love, my labor, my sacrifices still meant something, so I held on. I overlooked the way Aaron stopped asking me for help with his schoolwork. I ignored how Mark began answering my questions with distracted nods, his eyes fixed on his phone. I dismissed how the laughter at the dinner table no longer included me, how often they all made decisions without me, how I learned things about my own household in passing, as if I were a guest. And yet, I stayed present. I showed up. I cooked. I cleaned. I planned. I asked how their days were. I listened. I offered warmth even when it wasn't reciprocated. Maybe, I thought, if I loved harder, they'd remember how to love me back. But there's a quiet danger in that kind of hope. It blinds you. It makes you mistake routine for affection. It convinces you that crumbs are meals, that silence is peace, that distance is just fatigue. That morning, before everything changed, I woke up just like always, sat at my kitchen window with my lukewarm coffee, watching the sky soften from deep indigo to soft pink. I remember thinking how beautiful it all was. This home I had poured my soul into. I didn't know it yet, but I was watching the final sunrise of the life I thought I knew. Because sometimes the storm doesn't announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it whispers through the floorboards and hides behind everyday moments. And by the time it hits, you're already drowning. It started with small things you wouldn't notice unless you were looking closely. A forgotten plate left out overnight. A missed good night that used to come without fail. Conversations that died mid-sentence. Words left hanging in the air like broken ornaments. Beautiful once, but now just shards on the floor. I told myself it was normal. Families go through phases. Teenagers pull away. Husbands get busy. We don't always move in rhythm, but still, something felt off, like walking into a room just after someone whispered your name, but no one will admit to it. Aaron had stopped hugging me. At first, I thought it was just teenage awkwardness. He was 15, moody, private. Boys his age aren't exactly known for overflowing affection, but this was different. He didn't just pull away physically, he distanced himself emotionally, too. Our late-night talks, the ones we used to share about dreams and fears, had vanished like smoke. Instead, he'd come home, mumble a hello, and retreat to his room. The door stayed closed, locked sometimes, though we never had that rule before. And his eyes, they didn't meet mine the way they used to. It wasn't just distraction, it was detachment, like he was seeing someone he no longer recognized. Mark wasn't much better. He used to at least ask how my day was, not because he was particularly curious, but out of habit. Lately, even that had disappeared. We coexisted. He walked through the house like a man completing a checklist, not a partner sharing a life. The house began to hum with a new silence, not the comforting kind from my early mornings, but the dense, suffocating kind. The kind that fills the gaps where love used to live. I remember one night in particular. I had made dinner, Aaron's favorite, baked ziti, garlic bread, the kind of meal that used to make him light up as a kid. I even lit a candle at the center of the table, hoping to create a spark of warmth. I was trying, desperately trying. They came to the table late, sat down without a word. Mark glanced at his phone between bites. Aaron barely touched his food. "I thought this was your favorite," I said, trying to sound light. Aaron shrugged. "Tastes different." I blinked. "Different how?" He looked up at me for the briefest second. "I don't know. Just does." Mark didn't say anything. He just kept chewing, scrolling. That night, I cried in the laundry room. Not because of the food, but because of the distance. Because I was losing them, one unspoken sentence at a time. And no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they did. And that was worse. I started seeing things that didn't add up. Mark's late nights at work became more frequent. His phone never left his side. Passwords changed. I wasn't looking for signs, but they were there. Glaring, undeniable. And yet, Every time I tried to bring it up, he'd dismiss me. "You're overthinking again," he'd say, with that tired sigh I'd grown to hate. Or, "Can we not do this right now?" Eventually, I stopped asking. I wasn't sure what I feared more, hearing the truth or confirming that I didn't matter enough for the truth to be shared with me. Aaron, too, began changing in subtle but chilling ways. He started repeating phrases that didn't sound like him, lines that echoed Mark's tone, his sharpness. "You always make things about you," he once snapped when I asked him to take out the trash. "Why are you so dramatic?" I froze. Not because of the task. It wasn't about the trash. It was about how rehearsed his words felt, how they mirrored the same dismissive tone I'd heard from his father. It was like I was being slowly edited out of my own story. One evening, I overheard them in the living room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I had come downstairs to grab a blanket from the hall closet. Their voices floated through the air, low, tense. "She's too sensitive," Mark muttered. "Always has been." Aaron let out a small, bitter laugh. "Yeah, it's exhausting." I stood there, rooted to the floor, clutching that blanket like a shield. They were talking about me. Not in anger, not in frustration, but in dismissal, as if I were a burden to manage, not a person to love. I didn't say anything that night. I crawled into bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering when I became the outsider in my own home. From that point on, the air felt different, heavier, like the house itself was keeping secrets from me. I started second-guessing everything. Did Aaron always seem this cold? Was Mark always this distant? Or had I slowly been boiled in the pot, too numb to notice the rising heat? One afternoon, I found a group text thread on the shared iPad. Mark, Aaron, and his sister from his first marriage. They were planning a trip, a weekend getaway. I wasn't in the thread. My name wasn't mentioned. It was as though I didn't exist. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, coordinated. I was being erased. Not with violence, not with rage, but with quiet, practiced precision. And yet, I still clung to hope. Still believed that maybe, just maybe, if I held on tight enough, if I loved hard enough, they would come back to me. I didn't realize it yet, but the fracture wasn't new. It had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. I just hadn't wanted to look closely enough to see it. Desperation doesn't always look like screaming into the void or falling to your knees in the rain. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's a mother sitting at the edge of her son's bed, watching him pretend to sleep and wondering when exactly she became a stranger in his world. That was me, day after day. I found myself whispering things to Aaron as he lay with his back turned to me, hoping some part of him still recognized my voice, still felt the weight of my love. I'd smooth the hair from his forehead, like I used to when he was small and feverish, and say, "I'm still here, baby." But he never flinched, never turned, just lay there like stone. Maybe he thought if he stayed still long enough, I'd disappear. And part of me did. I began moving through the house like a ghost, doing laundry that no one thanked me for, folding shirts that weren't mine, replacing empty soap bottles, refilling the fridge. I did it all because it was the last thread tethering me to this family. The doing, the giving, the serving. Because if I stopped, what was left? I remember one morning, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize my reflection. My hair had thinned at the temples. There were lines around my mouth from clenching too long in silence. My eyes, they looked hollow, like someone had blown out the candle inside them. I placed my hand over my chest, trying to feel my heartbeat, just to remind myself I was still here, still real, still someone. Because no one else was seeing me anymore. Mark had stopped calling me by name. He used to say Claire softly when he was teasing me, when he was trying to get my attention. Now, he barely addressed me. Everything was passive, practical. Did you pay the bill? Can you pick up the dry cleaning? Don't forget the groceries. It was as though I had been reduced to a checklist of tasks, the woman who made things run, but was no longer invited to be a part of the life she maintained. One night, I gathered my courage. I waited until Aaron had gone to bed and Mark was settling in for the night. I sat on the edge of our bed, palms clammy, voice shaking. "We need to talk," I said. Mark didn't look up from his phone. "About what?" "About us, this house, the way things feel, the way I feel." He sighed, heavy and impatient. "Claire, not tonight." "Then when, Mark?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because it's been weeks, months. I can't keep pretending this is okay." Finally, he looked up. His face wasn't angry. It was worse, indifferent. "What do you want me to say?" "I want to know what I did. I want to know why you both treat me like I'm not even here." Mark sat up slowly, rubbed his face. "You're always making everything about feelings, about you. Maybe we're just tired of walking on eggshells." I blinked. "Eggshells? You take everything so personally. Maybe we're just done with the drama." That word, drama, hit like a slap. I stood up without another word, my heart sinking into my stomach. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried into a towel. Not loud sobs, just tears that leaked from somewhere deep and ancient. I cried because I realized I'd been gaslit into believing that my emotional needs were burdens, that love was something I had to earn, not something I deserved. The next day, I found a journal in the back of the hall closet. It was Aaron's. He must have forgotten it there during a clean-out. I know I shouldn't have opened it, and maybe I wouldn't have, had I not felt so utterly starved for connection. I read just a few pages, enough to confirm what I already feared. She's so fake, always smiling like nothing's wrong. She doesn't get it. No one wants her here. I wish she'd just leave already. My knees buckled. I sat right there on the closet floor, holding his words in my hands like they were burning me. I didn't even recognize the version of me he described. Where had this hate come from? I closed the journal and placed it back exactly where I found it. Not out of respect for privacy, that boundary had already been crossed, but because I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. His handwriting, once so familiar and beloved, now felt foreign, cold. I spent the next few days in a haze. I went through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. I smiled when I needed to. I nodded at their words, but inside, something was unraveling. One morning, I sat alone in my car outside the grocery store and asked myself a terrifying question. If I disappeared right now, who would come looking for me? Not because I wanted to vanish, but because I needed to know if I still mattered. And the answer, it wasn't clear. I started journaling myself. Little notes I wrote in the margins of receipts and old envelopes. Thoughts like, "I miss being seen. I don't know who I am when no one is watching. Why does love have to feel like begging?" It helped, a little. Like scratching at an itch I couldn't quite reach. It didn't solve anything, but it reminded me that my voice still existed, even if it was only for me. I also started walking. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd slip out and walk the neighborhood. The dark streets became my confessional. The quiet was comforting. The moon, my only witness. Sometimes I imagined what it would feel like to keep walking, past our block, past the next town, until my feet found a place where I was wanted again. Because I couldn't remember the last time anyone in that house looked at me with love, or even kindness. desperation had become my companion. Not the frantic, wild kind, but the kind that sits beside you silently while you fold laundry at midnight and wonder how you became invisible to the people you would have died for. I didn't know it yet, but something inside me had begun to shift. Not towards revenge, not yet, but towards truth. The kind that demands to be heard, even in whispers, even when no one is listening. I didn't see it coming that day. That's the part that haunts me. It was just an ordinary Saturday, the kind that should have been forgettable. I was sweeping the hallway, the bristles catching little dust bunnies and scattered bits of gravel Aaron had tracked in from his cleats. His soccer gear was strewn across the entryway, something that would have annoyed me once, but now I was grateful for any trace of his presence. I called up to him. "Aaron, can you come get your stuff?" There was no answer. "Aaron?" I called again, louder this time. He finally came to the top of the stairs. His face was blank, not tired, not irritated, just flat. "Can you please bring your bag in?" I asked gently. "I just cleaned here." He came down, slow, deliberate steps, picked up the duffel bag without a word. I turned to head back toward the kitchen, but then I heard him mutter something under his breath. "What did you say?" I asked, pausing. He looked up, eyes suddenly sharp, angry, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize my son. "I said, you don't live here anymore." The words didn't land at first. I blinked, confused. "What?" "You don't live here anymore," he said again, louder this time. "Why are you even still here?" My heart stopped. I stared at him, mouth open, unable to form a sound. My body went cold all at once, like blood had abandoned my limbs. What are you talking about?" I asked, but my voice cracked mid-sentence. "You're not part of this family. We've moved on. You don't get it. Nobody wants you here." Each word landed like a punch. I took a step back, my spine pressed against the wall. The broom clattered to the floor beside me. I looked up the stairs, expecting, hoping, Mark would come out and say something. Tell him to stop. Say it had gone too far. But he didn't. He stood there in the hallway, arms crossed, watching silently. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a moment of teenage rebellion. This wasn't just Aaron lashing out. This was orchestrated, federal, encouraged. Mark's silence confirmed it. I swallowed hard. My breath was shallow. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to collapse, to beg for someone, anyone, to explain how we had gotten here. But I didn't. I looked at Aaron, really looked. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched. But beneath that rage, I saw something else. Fear. He wasn't just angry. He was convinced of something. Convinced that I didn't belong. That I was the problem. That removing me was the solution. And I suddenly realized someone had taught him to feel that way. Mark. It had to be Mark. I wanted to ask, why? What did I do to deserve this? But I already knew those questions would fall on deaf ears. So instead, I said the only thing that felt honest. "I know." Aaron flinched. "What?" I stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. "I know I don't live here anymore. I've known for a long time." The silence between us thickened, like the house itself was holding its breath. "I just didn't want to believe it," I added softly. Aaron looked thrown off, like he hadn't expected me to say that, like he wanted a fight, wanted me to scream, break down, prove I was unstable. But I didn't give him that. I walked past him, slowly, deliberately, picked up the broom from the floor, and leaned it against the wall. And then I walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling, and poured myself a glass of water. I stared out the window, watching the wind rattle the leaves on the tree in the backyard, the one we planted when Aaron was born. It was taller than the house now, strong, unmoving. I remember digging that hole, the way Aaron's tiny hand clutched the edge of the pot as we lowered the sapling in. I remember telling him it would grow alongside him. That tree still stood tall. I was the one being uprooted. Minutes passed. Neither of them came into the kitchen. I heard the low thud of Aaron's door closing upstairs. Then the distant click of Mark turning on the TV in the den. No one came to check on me. No one asked if I was okay. I was alone, utterly and devastatingly alone. But here's the strange part. Somewhere in the ache, there was also clarity. That moment, Aaron's words, Mark's silence, the air vibrating with rejection, it broke something in me. But it also freed me, because there was no more pretending. No more waiting for things to change. No more wondering if I was imagining the coldness, exaggerating the exclusion. They had said it out loud. You don't live here anymore. And now that it had been spoken into existence, I couldn't unhear it, couldn't go back. The pain was raw, unbearable, but it was also honest, and honesty, no matter how brutal, is the first step to something else. I didn't know it yet, but those shattering words were not my ending. They were my beginning. I sat at the kitchen table long after the echo of Aaron's words had faded. The glass of water in my hand had gone warm, untouched. I stared through the window, watching the shadows stretch across the lawn as the day gave way to dusk. It was quiet again, but not the comforting kind of quiet I used to cherish. This silence was colder, heavier, like grief settling into the walls. Still, I didn't cry. Not then, because something in me had already been grieving long before Aaron spoke those words. I had known. Maybe not in that exact form, but in pieces, in every skipped conversation, in every look that slid past me instead of landing, in every unanswered text, in every birthday where the smiles felt hollow. I had known, and because I had known, his words didn't shock me. They just confirmed what I'd already felt building like a slow, steady storm. I think there's a part of every mother, every woman, that senses when she's being slowly edged out. It doesn't always happen with slamming doors or screaming matches. Sometimes it's in the way no one asks you how your day was, or how they make plans around you, not with you. It's in the way they speak in coded glances, share private jokes, close ranks. You're there, but you're not included. You're present, but not welcome. You feel it in your bones. I had felt it for months. The way Mark answered me like a co-worker, not a partner. The way Aaron looked through me like I was a shadow crossing his path. It wasn't sudden. It was erosion. A slow, daily wearing down of space, voice, presence. So when my son told me I didn't live here anymore, I didn't argue, I didn't shout, because in my heart, I had already packed a suitcase of grief. I had already mourned 100 small deaths in this house. The death of closeness, the death of shared laughter, the death of trust. I think back to the day I stopped leaving my coffee mug in the dishwasher. Noticed how mine was always the one left behind, forgotten. Eventually, I just rinsed it and tucked it away myself. Little things, like how they stopped asking me to be in pictures, how my name stopped appearing in group messages, how the dog started following Mark more than me. They're small at first, these signs, but they build. They layer on top of each other until they suffocate you, until the house doesn't echo with your presence anymore, just your tasks. Your fingerprints on doorknobs they no longer thank you for polishing. Your meals eaten in silence. Your folded laundry worn without gratitude. And yet, I stayed. Because that's what I was taught. That mothers hold things together. That wives endure. That love means staying even when you're no longer wanted. But that day, something changed. When Aaron said those words, It was like a switch flipped inside me. Not because he said it, but because I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, I know. And I meant it. There was a strange power in that, a quiet reclaiming of my own awareness. I realized that I had been complicit in my own disappearance by staying silent, by hoping, by shrinking to make space for their growing indifference. I had made myself small, believing that love would fill the gaps if I just waited long enough. But love doesn't survive in silence. It withers. It calcifies. I had loved them fully, but I hadn't loved myself. Not enough to say, this isn't okay. Not enough to say, I deserve more. Until that moment. That moment when my son looked at me with eyes that no longer saw me, and I realized I had already left long ago, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I had begun to detach the day I realized I could cry in front of Mark, and he wouldn't ask why. I had begun to leave when Aaron called me extra for trying to connect with him, when they rolled their eyes at my laughter, when they stopped caring if I was hurting. That was when I began stepping away, not with my feet, but with my soul. Piece by piece, I had been retrieving myself from this place. And now, finally, the words had been spoken aloud. You don't live here anymore. I had been waiting for permission to stop pretending, and now I had it. But more than permission, I had proof. Proof that this wasn't just in my head, that the ache was real, that the erasure had happened. And because I had known, because I had carried that unspoken truth for so long, I wasn't broken. Wounded, yes, but not broken. I sat there in the fading light, breathing deeply, my chest tight but steady. I wasn't sure what I would do next, whether I would leave tomorrow or stay another week, whether I'd confront Mark or let the silence speak for itself. But I knew this. I would not beg to belong. I would not plead for scraps of connection. I would not fight for a seat at a table I had set, prepared, and cleaned without thanks. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine, not in rage, but in clarity, not to punish them, but to reclaim myself. I stood from the table, walked upstairs, and closed my bedroom door. Not with finality, but with purpose, because sometimes knowing the truth is the beginning of healing, and I had known it all along. I had just finally let myself admit it. It's strange how memories can betray you, how the sweetest ones, the ones you thought would comfort you in hard times, end up cutting the deepest. In the days after Aaron's outburst, I found myself haunted not by what he'd said, but by all the moments that came before it, the ones that used to mean something, the ones I thought would last forever. I remembered the way he used to fall asleep in my arms, his little hands curled around my fingers, his breath warm against my chest as I rocked him through fevers and growing pains. I remembered his first day of kindergarten, how he clung to my leg and wouldn't let go, how I crouched down, kissed his forehead, and promised him I'd be there when the bell rang. I remembered staying up all night to help him with his science fair project, printing labels, cutting foam board, gluing stars onto black cardboard, while he drifted to sleep at the table, and how he lit up with pride when he showed it off to his class the next day. I remembered Saturday mornings, pancakes, cartoons, and his laughter echoing through the living room as he climbed into my lap, syrup on his fingers, his head against my heart. I remembered the Christmas he made me a card with crooked hearts and scribbled words that read, "Best Mom Ever," written in red crayon with backward E's, and how I kept that card for years in the top drawer of my dresser like it was sacred. I remembered the time he got sick at school and the nurse couldn't reach Mark. So I drove across town in the middle of a work meeting, heart racing, just to hold his hand while he lay pale and weak on the cot. I remembered how his eyes lit up when I entered the room. I remembered how he used to call me Mama long after most boys switched to Mom, as if some part of him didn't want to let go of that closeness. I remembered the little things, tying his shoes, cutting the crusts off his sandwiches, tucking notes into his lunchbox that said, "You've got this," in my messy handwriting. I remembered how he used to ask me to sit with him while he fell asleep, and how I'd hum the same lullaby every night, one my own mother used to sing to me, thinking it would somehow protect him from the world. I remembered 1,000 moments just like those, each one a thread in the tapestry of our bond, each one feeling so permanent at the time, so unbreakable. But now, each memory stung like a bee trapped beneath my skin, reminders that the boy who once needed me now resented my very presence. I tried to trace back where it went wrong, but there was no single moment, no explosion, just a slow fading, a dimming of warmth, a drifting apart that I didn't recognize until it was too late. And it wasn't just Aaron. I thought about Mark too, how, in the early years, he used to reach for my hand during car rides, how he'd leave me sticky notes on the bathroom mirror that said things like, "Don't forget you're beautiful," or "Dinner tonight, just us." I thought about the nights we stayed up talking until 2 a.m., planning our future, laughing about our dreams, and how somewhere along the line, our dreams diverged without anyone noticing. I thought about how he used to run his fingers through my hair when I was stressed, and how now he barely looked at me when I entered a room. I remembered anniversaries when we'd slow dance in the kitchen to no music, and birthdays where he'd surprise me with little things I'd casually mentioned months earlier. A book, a bracelet, a special tea. It wasn't always distant, not always cold. We had love once, real love, and yet here I was, standing alone in the house we built together, surrounded by echoes of a family that no longer claimed me. Memories that once comforted me now made it hard to breathe. They rose at the most inconvenient times, when I folded Aaron's laundry and came across an old t-shirt from his favorite summer camp, or when I heard a song on the radio we used to dance to in the living room, or when I made spaghetti and remembered how Mark used to say, "No one made it quite like me." Every corner of the house held a reminder, every drawer, every photograph, every scent. And the cruelest part was knowing that, for me, those memories still held weight, still lived inside me like sacred scripture, while for them, they were disposable, just snapshots of a version of me they had long since outgrown. That realization that I was still tethered to them by memories they had already abandoned was perhaps the most painful part of it all, because it meant I was grieving alone, not just the people they used to be, but the person I used to be when I was loved by them. And maybe, worst of all, I knew I would never be able to look back on those memories the same way again. They were no longer soft edges of joy. They were sharp, jagged, and they reminded me that love, no matter how fiercely given, is never a guarantee that it will be returned. The truth doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it crashes into you like a cold wave, pulling you under before you even realize you're drowning. For me, it came in the form of a forgotten voicemail. I hadn't meant to hear it. I was clearing out old notifications on Mark's shared tablet, the one we both used for calendar events and email logins. It buzzed with a new alert, and out of habit, I tapped into the voicemail app. Most of the messages were junk, telemarketers, pharmacy reminders. But one was marked new with a timestamp from 2 nights ago. I should have stopped there. I should have looked away. But something in my gut told me to listen. I tapped play. Her voice filled the room, soft, younger than mine, She laughed lightly before saying, "Tell Aaron I'll grab those concert tickets next time. It was so fun seeing you both. Hope she didn't make a scene again. Anyway, call me later. Love you." My blood ran cold. I replayed it 3 times, unable to breathe. "Tell Aaron, so fun seeing you both. Hope she didn't make a scene again." I wasn't the she was talking about. I was the ghost in the background, the inconvenience, the obstacle, the shame. I stared at the wall, numb. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just another woman. It was the confirmation that they had shared something, my husband and my son, behind my back, something real, something that involved coordination, cooperation, and secrecy. I wasn't just being shut out emotionally. I was being replaced in the routines, replaced in the memories, replaced in the hierarchy of the home I had once ruled with love and effort. I confronted Mark that evening. He was pouring himself a drink, calm as ever, like the world wasn't about to tilt on its axis. "I heard the voicemail," I said quietly. He looked up, blinked. "What voicemail?" "Don't insult me," I said. My voice didn't shake, not this time. "The one from her? The one where she talked about Aaron? The one where she said she hoped I didn't make a scene?" He sighed and set the glass down. I hated that sigh, the deep, tired one that made it seem like I was the exhausting one, like I was the storm. "Claire, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "She's just a friend. Someone I've been close with." "For how long?" He hesitated. That split second was enough. "A few months," he said finally. "Maybe longer." "And Aaron knows?" My voice cracked. Mark didn't answer. That silence was worse than any confession. "You told him," I whispered. "You told him about her. You introduced them. You brought her into our lives while I was still here. Claire, you made me the villain in my own home." "No one made you anything," he said, his voice rising now. "You're always looking for someone to blame." I stared at him, stunned. "I gave everything to this family. Everything." "And maybe that's the problem," he snapped. "You made this house your whole identity. You smothered us with your need to be needed." I took a step back. Smothered. That word cut deeper than all the others. I'd sacrificed for them. Every missed promotion, every sleepless night, every holiday I planned down to the last detail, all of it had been twisted into a weapon. My love had become a flaw in their eyes. I turned to leave, but his voice followed me. "She's good for him, you know. She listens without judgment." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed I no longer shared with a partner, but with a stranger. I thought about all the ways they must have bonded over me, laughing at my routines, rolling their eyes at my reminders, dismissing my care as control. I thought about how many lies had been told over dinners I cooked, under a roof I maintained. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls like a ghost, touching the walls, the framed photos, the places where life once pulsed with joy. I realized I'd been clinging to an illusion. That this house, this family, this marriage, they had already moved on. I was the only one still pretending it existed. The next morning, I took down the family photo in the hallway. The one we took in autumn, smiling under golden trees. The one where Aaron stood between us, arms linked with mine, grinning. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed it face down in a drawer, because that version of us no longer lived here, and maybe never did. It wasn't just about Mark's betrayal. It wasn't just about Aaron's cruelty. It was about the years I lost, slowly, silently, to a truth I was too afraid to confront. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The cold truth had come, and instead of breaking me, it made something sharp and clear inside me come alive. I would not stay in a house where I was unwelcome. I would not cling to people who replaced me while I was still breathing in the same rooms. And I would not keep pouring love into a well that only echoed back with emptiness. The truth was brutal, but it was mine now, and I wouldn't let them bury it under another smile. The day I started packing my things, Aaron came home early. I didn't expect him to speak. Lately, we passed each other like strangers, if he even acknowledged me at all. But something in my quiet movements must have struck him differently this time. He stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms folded, posture defensive. "Are you seriously leaving?" he asked, voice flat. I didn't answer right away. I folded another sweater into the suitcase, pressing it down so it would fit beneath the others. "I'm doing what you told me to do," I said calmly. "I don't live here anymore, remember?" He flinched, just barely. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "You didn't mean the words," I said, looking at him now. "But you meant the distance. You meant the silence. You meant every day you walked past me like I wasn't there." His eyes dropped to the floor, then back up. There was something else in them this time. Not just resentment, guilt, and something I hadn't seen in a long time. Confusion. "You made it so hard to talk to you," he said suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "You always looked so disappointed, like nothing I did was ever good enough." I stared at him, stunned. "Aaron, I've never—" "You didn't say it," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You didn't have to. You were just there, always watching, always hovering, asking questions I didn't want to answer. You made everything feel like a test." I stepped back, shaken. All those nights I thought I was showing love. He saw surveillance, all those check-ins, those dinners, those efforts. They hadn't landed the way I'd imagined. "I was trying to protect you," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't need protecting," he snapped. "I needed space." Silence stretched between us, like a wire ready to snap. Then softer, almost like an afterthought, he added, "She gave me that, the other woman. She listened. She didn't expect so much." That broke something in me. Not because I hated her. I didn't know her well enough for that. But because I realized she had taken a role that I'd been holding with both hands, terrified to let go. "I wasn't expecting," I whispered. "I was just trying to stay close." He rubbed his hands through his hair, frustrated. I know you meant well, but it felt like I was always disappointing you." Tears welled in my eyes. "Then why didn't you just tell me?" "Because Dad said you wouldn't understand," he admitted. "He said you'd make it a bigger deal, that you'd overreact, that you'd make everything about you." I froze. There it was, the seed, planted by Mark, watered by resentment, bloomed into this chasm between us. "He said that?" I asked, even though I already knew. Aaron nodded slowly. "He told me you were unstable, that you were always looking for a reason to blow up." I sat down on the edge of the bed, every muscle in my body sagging. "He's been telling me that since last year," Aaron continued. "Since you two started fighting more. He said you were suffocating us, that we needed room to breathe." "And you believed him," I said, my voice hollow. "I didn't know what to believe," he said. "I was confused. You were always emotional, and he was calm. He made it make sense." I laughed bitterly. Of course he did. It wasn't the first time Mark had rewritten reality to serve his narrative. He was a master at seeming logical, while I looked like the storm. He'd always framed his detachment as strength, his avoidance as peace. Meanwhile, I was too much, too expressive, too raw. But now the story had changed, because Aaron was telling it, and I could finally see how he'd been caught in the middle. "I just wanted peace," Aaron said quietly. "And he told me we'd have that if you weren't always in the way." Those words hurt, but they weren't meant to. They were honest. He was a child manipulated into picking sides he never should have had to choose between. I reached for his hand, and to my surprise, he didn't pull away. "I'm sorry you felt that way," I said. "I never wanted to be the one who made your life harder." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I didn't realize how much he was shaping how I saw you." I nodded, tears rolling down my cheeks. I wasn't the perfect mother, but I hadn't been the monster they made me out to be either. There was another side to the story, and now, finally, it was being told, not in blame, but in truth. Later that night, I sat in the quiet again, just like I used to. Only now, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real because my pain had been named. My absence had been acknowledged, and Aaron, my son, had finally seen me. Maybe it didn't change everything. Maybe it didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, a voice, and the beginning of a bridge back to something that could one day feel like love again. The house felt like a ticking bomb. After that conversation with Aaron, the air shifted. He was quieter, more present, watching me with a softness I hadn't seen in months. He started helping out again. Small gestures at first, clearing his dishes, asking if I needed anything from the store. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning, a crack in the ice that had long sealed shut. Mark noticed the shift almost immediately. I caught him staring across the dinner table one night, his expression unreadable as Aaron asked me how my day was. A simple question, but one Mark hadn't asked me in over a year. "Fine," I replied, keeping my eyes on my plate, but I felt the tension humming beneath the surface. Later that evening, after Aaron went to bed, Mark cornered me in the hallway. "What did you say to him?" I turned slowly. "I didn't say anything you haven't already planted in his head." Mark's jaw tightened. "Don't play the victim." "I'm not playing anything," I said, "but I'm done pretending." He stepped closer, voice low and hard. "You think you can turn him against me? After everything?" "I didn't turn him. He saw the truth. You just didn't expect him to question it." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "You always need someone to validate your emotions. You feed off being the wounded one." I stared at him, amazed by how predictable his words were. The same deflections, the same spin. He wasn't rattled by my pain. He was rattled by losing control. "You manipulated him," I said quietly. "You fed him your version of me over and over until he couldn't see who I really was. But now he's starting to remember." Mark shook his head. "He's confused. He's a kid." "No," I said. "He's growing, and you can't handle that." For a moment, I thought he might explode. His fists clenched, but he said nothing, just turned and walked away. But the silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Over the next few days, the house became a war zone of unspoken alliances. Aaron started spending more time downstairs. He asked for my help with his homework again, sat next to me during TV shows, even offered to cook dinner one night. Mark responded by becoming icier, withholding, retreating into long phone calls and sudden errands. One evening, I heard them arguing. Their voices carried through the vents, sharp, heated. "You don't get to decide how I feel about her," Aaron shouted. Mark's voice came next, lower, angrier. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From my own mother? Are you even hearing yourself?" "She's toxic," Mark hissed. "She twists everything." "No," Aaron said, and I heard the thump of his fist hitting something. "You're the one who lied." I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding. They were unraveling now, not because I'd pulled any strings, but because the truth was doing what it always does when you bury it too long. It rises. The next morning, Mark barely looked at either of us. He drank his coffee in silence, his face blank. Aaron watched him from across the kitchen. I could see it in his eyes. The disillusionment, the sorrow. He wasn't just angry. He was mourning the version of his father he thought he knew. I knew that feeling all too well. That afternoon, I found a printed photo ripped in half on the kitchen counter. It was one of us, Mark and I, holding baby Aaron in the hospital, all smiles and exhaustion. The half with my face was missing. I didn't need to ask who had done it. It wasn't Aaron. Mark wasn't used to losing control, and he was unraveling. That evening, I called a family meeting, not because I thought it would fix things, but because I refused to let the house tear itself apart in silence. We sat in the living room, the three of us, Aaron on one end of the couch, arms folded, Mark in his recliner, legs crossed, guarded. I sat between them, feeling like a mediator at a peace negotiation that no one wanted to attend. "I'm leaving," I said. "But before I go, I want the truth out." Mark rolled his eyes. "Here we go." Aaron sat up straighter. "I don't need you to admit what you did," I continued. "I don't need apologies. I just need clarity for him." I looked at Aaron. I was never perfect. I know I held on too tight sometimes. But I loved you. I never tried to control you. I just didn't know how to let go without losing you. Aaron blinked, eyes wet. "And your father," I turned to Mark. "You used that to drive a wedge between us. You made yourself the calm one, so I'd look like the problem." "I did what I had to do," Mark said stiffly. "You were falling apart." "No," I said. "I was asking for connection. You called it falling apart because it made it easier to ignore me." Aaron looked between us, his face pale. "This isn't about who's right anymore," I added. "It's about him knowing both sides, so he can choose for himself." Silence filled the room. Then Aaron stood up. "I already have," he said. He walked over to me, wrapped his arms around my shoulders, and held on. Mark didn't move, didn't speak, just stared as if watching something slip through his fingers. And maybe he was, because the house was no longer his fortress. The illusion had cracked, the alliances had shifted, and in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was losing everything. I felt like I was finally gaining myself back. The morning I left, the house was still. There was no dramatic storm, no packed car in the driveway, no shouting behind closed doors. Just a soft sky outside the window and the sound of birdsong, almost mockingly peaceful. It felt surreal, how something so quiet could mark the end of a life I had poured everything into. I folded my final bag closed, the zipper catching slightly on the fabric before giving way. My hand lingered on the handle, not out of hesitation, but reverence. This wasn't just a suitcase. It was a container of closure, a vessel holding the pieces of me I'd fought to preserve. I walked through each room, not to say goodbye, but to reclaim my memories from them. The living room where we used to dance in our socks, the hallway where Aaron took his first steps, the kitchen where I spent countless mornings making pancakes. Believing that warm food could hold a family together, I touched the back of the dining room chair where I once sat late into the night, waiting for Mark to come home. He rarely did, at least not fully. His body walked through that door, but his presence hadn't followed in years. When I passed Aaron's room, the door was cracked open. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched, fiddling with the frayed sleeve of his hoodie. "I'm going," I said softly. He looked up, eyes red, not from crying, but from everything that came before the tears. The kind of exhaustion that only truth and consequence can bring. "I know," he said. I walked over and sat beside him, careful not to break the silence between us too harshly. "I'm not leaving you," I told him. "I'm leaving what we became. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I hated you," he whispered, as if confessing a sin. "For a while, I really did. I know. I thought you were the problem. I know." I said again, because nothing else needed to be said. We sat like that for a while, our bodies close, our hearts slowly realigning. I want to fix it, he said. You don't have to fix it all right now, I replied. Just don't let the story end here. I kissed the side of his head, and he didn't flinch this time. When I stood to leave, he didn't ask me to stay, and I loved him even more for that. Mark didn't come out of his room. I didn't expect him to. He had always waited until moments passed before reacting to them, as if detachment gave him control. But I knew better now. I knew silence didn't mean strength. Sometimes it was just cowardice in a more palatable form. I stepped out of the front door with nothing but 2 suitcases, a bag of journals, and my name. The rest, the titles, the expectations, the role of wife and housekeeper and peacekeeper, I left behind. There was no one waiting for me in the driveway. No warm embrace or tearful reunion. But there was freedom. And it didn't come with fanfare. It came with a deep breath and the certainty that I had finally chosen myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking away to punish anyone. I wasn't walking away out of spite. I was walking away to survive, to heal, to grow. And in that quiet departure, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know where the road would lead. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This time, I wouldn't lose myself trying to belong to people who made me question my worth. I had loved deeply. I had tried fiercely. But now, I was done apologizing for taking up space. Done proving my value. Done shrinking. This wasn't a story of abandonment. This was a story of return. A return to myself. And as I pulled the door closed behind me, I whispered goodbye, not just to the house, but to the version of me who stayed too long waiting for love that had already left the room. The first night alone in my new apartment was the quietest of my life. Not the kind of quiet that suffocates, the kind that sings. I lit a candle and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket, not a cage. There were no footsteps above, no television blaring, no hurried voices or passive-aggressive sighs, just stillness, my stillness. And in that sacred hush, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. My own breath, steady and sure. I didn't cry that night, not because I wasn't grieving, I was, but because I'd already wept all the tears I needed back in that house. This place, this fresh start, wasn't for sorrow. It was for rediscovery. The first few days were hard. I reached for things that weren't there. Aaron's shoes by the door, the dog's leash, Mark's keys jangling in the bowl. Habits don't break cleanly. They unravel slowly, thread by thread, memory by memory. I still made too much coffee, still looked over my shoulder, expecting to hear someone call my name, but no one did, and slowly, that stopped hurting. I began to reclaim the pieces of me that had been shelved. I enrolled in a pottery class, something I had always dreamed of but never made time for. I burned dinner twice in a row and laughed about it instead of crying. I spent an entire afternoon rearranging my furniture, then put it all back the way it was just because I could. There was power in that, in making choices for myself, in not asking for permission, in being the center of my own life again. I started journaling more, not to vent, but to reflect. I wrote about what I had lost, yes, but also about what I had found in its place. A strange kind of clarity, an unexpected peace, a deeper understanding of myself. I had once mistaken silence for abandonment. Now I saw it as space, a fertile field where strength could grow. Aaron texted me a few days after I left. Just one line, "I miss you." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I miss you too. I'm here when you're ready." No pressure, no guilt, just presence. That became our new language, sparse but sincere. A week later, He called. We talked for 37 minutes about everything and nothing. School, music, his friends, a weird dream he had. Not once did he ask when I was coming back, but not once did he sound like he wanted me gone. That was enough. Mark didn't reach out. Not once. And I stopped waiting for him to. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said, or worse, ignored. I no longer needed his words to validate my experience. I no longer needed him to acknowledge the pain. That had been the hardest lesson. Learning that closure isn't given, it's chosen. And I had chosen mine. I started walking every morning. Just me, the sun rising behind the buildings, and the hum of a city waking up. I passed the same elderly man watering his porch plants, the same couple jogging hand in hand, the same dog barking at the same bird. These simple, repeated sights began to feel like home. I volunteered at a local shelter. At first, it was just to fill the hours, but soon it became a part of me. Listening to others, women with stories far darker than mine, women who left in the middle of the night with nothing but hope, reminded me of what resilience really looks like. It's not loud. He didn't approach me at first, just hovered near the food table, eyes flicking in my direction. When he finally walked over, his smile was tight. "You painted that?" he asked, nodding toward the tree. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It's powerful. Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "You seem different." "I am." Silence stretched between us, familiar and foreign. "You look good," he said. I smiled. "I feel good." And it was true. He started to say something else, maybe an apology, maybe a memory, but I stopped him with a gentle raise of my hand. "It's okay," I said. "You don't have to explain," because I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for closure, not for redemption, not even for understanding. I had already given it to myself. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because for the first time in years, I was no longer running from pain. I was walking toward purpose. I began speaking at women's events, sharing my story. My voice, once suppressed, now rang clear in crowded rooms. People came up after every event, some in tears, some in gratitude. "You told my story," they'd say. "You gave me courage." That became my mission, not just to heal, but to help others rise, too. I wasn't just the woman who had been pushed out of her home. I was the woman who rebuilt herself without asking permission. I was the woman who turned betrayal into boundaries, who turned silence into strength, who turned loss into liberation. And that's what they never expected. They expected me to crumble, to vanish, to fall apart so completely I'd never reassemble. But instead, I became more whole, more honest, more alive. I think that's what rising truly is. Not some grand return or dramatic victory, but a quiet refusal to stay buried. A decision every day to reach for the light, even when everything around you tells you to shrink. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what paths Aaron and I will walk. But I know this: whatever comes, I'll face it as the woman who rose. Not from revenge, but from clarity. Not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove myself right. Because I lived through the fire, and I didn't just survive. I became something new, something strong, something whole, and they never expected that. But I did. Deep down, I always knew I was never meant to stay small. I was meant to rise.